Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vandana Ram. I'm the director of Bankstown Art Centre. I'd like to firstly invite Auntie Lynn Martin to do the Welcome to Country. Auntie Lynn is a local Darug elder and has been extremely involved in, I think, most things that have happened at Bankstown Art Centre for the last 10 years. And I would like her to do the welcome. Thank you.
Badyara Gumara, good afternoon. Waramai, Ninjini, Layora, Nagani, Balawa, Jumada, Julawu. Welcome to all. I ask that you listen to the spirits of this land. I wish to pay my respects to my ancestors and all elders for their keeping and passing down of their knowledge of our dream time through song, dance, art and stories. This land was, is and always will be Aboriginal land. But what does this mean to our people? Well, it means a connection to the land that is ingrained in us. You hear of references to country, but when we speak of country, traditional country, it is something beyond the dictionary definition. For us, it is more than just a place on the map. To us, country refers to the values, places, resources and cultural obligations associated with a particular area, its features, and it also describes the entirety of our ancestral domains. While some of us may not longer reside on the land of their ancestors, having been removed, pushed out, losing their language, dreamtime stories and culture, there is still a yearning for their country, and many go to great lengths to reconnect. The First Nation people have cared for this land for at least 65,000 years, knowing how to survive on it. And it is important to have a genuine Indigenous-led embedding of our culture. This is vital for all to learn about the First Nations cultural practices. As with these lessons from our ancestors, we hope the past will inform and help our shared future. So I ask for your help in walking in the footsteps of our ancestors, honouring their journey, respecting their struggles, all the while creating our own for the next generation to follow. Daya Bumalo Ma, Yun, Brian, Yuin, Yuri, Benil. This land was, is and always will be Aboriginal land. Waramai Didjara Yani, Jandali, Bullawil, Nangani. Welcome to Darug land, and thank you for walking with me and sharing my dreaming.
Thank you so much, Auntie Lynn. This art centre sits on Darug land, and I acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and whose cultures and customs have long nurtured and continue to nurture this land. I also pay my respects to elders, past, present, and any Aboriginal people here today. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I welcome the audience that's here in the space and also the people who are coming and joining us online. This forum is called Beyond the Anthropocene, which is part of Bankstown Art Centre's inaugural Bankstown Biennale. This Biennale brings together artists from various disciplines to create work examining recent crises: COVID-19, the nationwide bushfires, global economic recession, and lockdown, which are impacting on us locally and globally. It has been a time for us all to press that pause button, but also a time to ask ourselves some really big questions. The artists we selected were invited to offer alternative futures, new ways of imagining our place in the world, to offer hope and solutions for transformative change. So on our panel today, we've got a great lineup of some of the artists from the Biennale, and I'm going to go just in order of the people sitting here. Leaving Costa for the moment, Alison Clouston, who is part of a duo. We actually have some duos in this Biennale. So Alison and Boyd work together. So musician, composer, and sound artist Boyd and visual artist Alison have collaborated over many years to create immersive sound and sculptural installations for galleries and alternative sites, both inside and out in the landscape. They bring their close observations of the natural world into a poetically charged relationship with technology to examine our human place within the rest of nature. Claire Healy is another part of a duo working collaboratively with Sean Cordero since 2003, and their practice reflects a preoccupation with the dynamics of global mobility, the fallout of consumer society, and contemporary notions of home. Combining a playful sense of humor and an engagement with art historical precedents, their work is characterized by the deconstruction and reinvention of prefabricated structures and assembling accumulated objects into amazing sculptures and installations. We then have the wonderful Nicole Monks, who's made it here just in time, who's a transdisciplinary artist of Yamatji Wajari Dutch and English heritage. Nicole's work is informed by her cross-cultural identity and takes its focus from storytelling as a way to connect the past with the present and future. A designer by trade, Nicole works across art forms to work with furniture, objects, textiles, video, performance, and across these varied forms of contemporary art and design, her work reflects Aboriginal philosophies of sustainability, innovation, and collaboration. So her work is in the courtyard here today.
Our work.
Our work with Uncle Harry as well, of course, and elders from the community. Leah Smith, next in line. At the core of Leah's practice is a keen interest in collaboration and knowledge, where learning is the medium, the artwork, and the education. She's worked across Australia and India since 2011. Leah is fascinated by the educational turn in contemporary art making and the radical changes and pedagogical shifts impacting how we teach and how we learn. She engages in making, writing, and research and is the assistant manager at Caldor Public Art Projects. And then we have, very lucky and privileged to have Bruce Pascoe online from Victoria. So thank you, Bruce. It's wonderful to have you with us. Bruce is a Bunurong Tasmanian and Yuin man born in Melbourne who grew up in a remote island in the Bass Strait and had a joey and a dog as pets. He lives in Gypsy Point in Victoria. He has 2 children, 3 grandchildren, 2 dogs. And of course, beyond that, his career spans teaching, farming, bartending, writing, working on archaeological sites, and researching Aboriginal languages. I think most of you will know his work, but he's been a prolific writer and has written more than 20 books, including Dark Emu, and has won many literary awards. Jason Wing, sorry I missed you, Jason, there, before Bruce, is sitting at the end there of our seating, and Jason is a Biripi man. He began as a street artist and since expanded his practice to incorporate photo media, installation, and painting. He's influenced by his cultural upbringing as well, and he explores the ongoing challenges that impact the wider community. Jason really calls into question our understanding of history, our current socio-political reality. He repurposes everyday objects and questions history, and his work is held quite widely, both privately and publicly. Okay, so that's our speakers. And then, I don't know if Costa needs any introduction to anybody, but I will give you a quick introduction to Costa. Costa is the facilitator for this forum, Logie Award-winning host of Gardening Australia. He was born in Sydney, grew up in North Bondi, and Costa developed a love of nature from the time he worked in his grandfather's small market garden. He chose to take this to the next level by studying landscape gardening, and he became interested in issues of sustainability. I wanted to read a little excerpt of something that I found on his website, and it spoke to me. And he says, "In a world where we're bombarded with information and time on devices, I think the most powerful benefit of being out in the garden is the opportunity to leave them behind, to actually just immerse ourselves in the unexpected. So walk outside, just appreciate the different light, appreciate the fresh air, the feeling of the breeze on your face, seeing the colors, watching the insects, hearing the birds, watching them move, seeing the seasons change. That's who we are. It's really a case of just going back to where we need to be." And I think that sets the tone for our conversation this afternoon, so I'm going to hand it over to Costa. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. Good afternoon, everyone, and a big cheerio to everyone watching, be it watching live now and also to everyone watching on the replay. It's wonderful that you could join us, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion ahead. I'd like to start off by thanking Auntie Lynn for the wonderful welcome and for setting the scene of today's discussion, not just in terms of the welcome, but also in her role here at the Arts Centre for so long now, and your influence and connection not only with the artists but with the community at large. So thank you for being here with us, Auntie Lynn, and I want to bring up a little point in my brief intro in a moment about something that really sparked for me when you were talking. Vandana, thank you for the chance to come and be a part of this wonderful panel with the artists. I've had a chance, unlike you watching, I've had a chance to have a look at the artists firsthand, but I will start with the artists just giving us a brief explanation of their works and what the idea of this exhibition sparked for them. I'd also like to welcome the patron of the Arts Centre, Brian Brown. It's wonderful to have you here for this event, the inaugural Bankstown Biennale. I love firsts because firsts imply seconds and thirds and fourths. And it's wonderful for our artists here to be able to say that you were part of the first Biennale for Bankstown. So thank you for stepping up and stepping out. And of course also to Bruce for committing time this afternoon. It's wonderful to see you, brother. And it's a pleasure to have you here and to be able to contribute. And one of the benefits of what's happened over this very interesting year in history is that we have, because of the fact that we've been able to make this sort of connection much better, because the chance to fly and the chance to travel isn't there, and we can shift and adapt as humans. And I think that's going to be one of the big benefits of 2020, the fact that people have pivoted, they have shifted, they have been pushed outside of a comfort zone and pushed energy into new quarters. And that's what we need. That's the only way change happens. And I'm sitting next to 5 change merchants, because artists speak another language. They speak to us in different ways. And it's that language that I'd really like to explore today as well. Visual language, the language of emotion, and particularly Indigenous language, and what is happening with that and how important that is. And Auntie said very clearly those cultural obligations, the values, the places, the resources, but the cultural obligations. How do we engender those cultural obligations if we're not speaking the language that they hear and understand? So I'm really interested to hear how that will play out through our artists speaking today. Symbiosis, from the Greek word living together, a relationship between organisms, 2 organisms but more, because symbiosis works across multiple organisms. It's a wonderful title for an exhibition, and I think Vandana summed it up beautifully when she said, how do we use this opportunity in time to go beyond an Anthropocene worldview, where our species has been a dominant influence on the life of the earth for so long? How can we transform those actions to benefit other species, the climate, the environment? All of these elements I saw played out in our art installations, and I'm sure the artists will be talking to this. How do we hold on to the lessons learnt through lockdown about the importance of our backyards, local neighbourhoods, parks, public spaces, waterways, of course the Cooks and Georges River, the arteries and veins of this local community, but also our regional community as well. These are incredibly important details that the artists have brought to life with different artworks. So without any further comment from me, I'd like to throw it open, and if you'd like to take a couple of minutes and just explain to everyone here, but particularly to people watching, what you took from symbiosis and how you've portrayed that and what you're engendering in your work.
I think I was very excited to learn about the symbiotic relationship between trees and each other, and their relationship with the mycorrhizal fungi that allows them to talk together. And so I'd already, for a long time, Boyd and I had been making work about trees and people and that relationship, but to learn about that secret underground relationship where at a cellular level there's a symbiotic communication going on, exchange of information and nutrients, even warnings so plants can get ready for an insect attack that's coming, for instance. I just really loved that. So it kind of fused that long-term interest that we've had in working with trees, and we've brought whole trees into galleries before, Boyd and I, with sound. And of course, the Green Wattle fire, the Green Wattle Creek fire, impacted on a patch of land surrounded by Blue Mountains Heritage Wilderness. It's a patch of land where we've spent a lot of time, and it's really centred our art practice for more than 30 years now. It was burning and everyone evacuated, so we were dying to see how things survived or not and get back in there, and that's where that tree I've used in the gallery here came from. Its companions were burning. It's a native cypress tree, a tree I love. It's got a beautiful formal quality to it, structurally, I mean, you know. Its companions were burning, so when the RFS came through trying to get to our shack, they pushed that one over. So I was able to get the whole tree from the root where all that mycorrhizal activity would normally happen, right to the tips. Yeah, so I see that it's... I think that we learning about the mycorrhizal fungal plant communication it's about us acknowledging that there's so much about life on Earth that we have yet to understand. So much is going on that we've been blind to. So that's part of the science that's leading us to a new kind of way of loving the planet. Because I love what you said, Auntie Lynn, about that long-standing community response to land and that cultural duty to land. And all cultures on planet Earth used to have that before they lost it. And maybe science is going to help us find it back, as well as looking back at our cultural roots.
I totally agree, Alison. And Jason and I were talking just before we came in about the fact that beneath our feet is this whole world of answers that we haven't even asked the questions of. And here we are with cultural priorities saying we want to land on meteorites and other planets, when the questions that we need to ask of our planet and of the land that we're standing on, as Auntie said, and I know Bruce will dive into this because of the work that he's doing around how the soil and how the earth was managed for so long. So it's really wonderful that you started, because that is the grounding, you know, that is the earth that we're on. So thank you, Alison. Claire, tell everyone a little bit about your work and how you interpreted the theme.
Okay, so we've got Sean Cadero and myself. We've got two works in the Biennale. One is called The Pilgrims, which is a video piece that it's shot in an aeroplane graveyard in Bangkok, and we shot that just before the whole lockdown, or COVID was even happening, and I guess we edited it during lockdown, which was an interesting process in itself. And the other piece that we've got in the Biennale is called Cabin Fever, and it's an aviation component that is now really a terrestrial piece that houses some grevilleas. And I guess we responded in thinking about the upheaval that has come upon many of us this year, and the sudden drastic kind of changes that have taken place. And I think this has led us to really appreciate our immediate vicinity, rather than looking beyond a horizon and wanting to be elsewhere, wanting, you know, to be in search of some kind of idyllic paradise which exists somewhere. I think, you know, we have come to understand that that is right beneath our feet. Sean and I live in the Blue Mountains, so during the bushfire season in December, it was, you know, we've been watching the slow renewal, regrowth of, which is going to take decades, but I mean, even with the recent rain we've had, you can see there's many beautiful bits of greenery re-emerging. And I think, you know, for us to just stay still, not to be somewhere else on the planet, and to appreciate, you know, the vicinity of this amazing heritage listed national park that we live in has been something for us. And I think we've responded in that way with the pieces in the Biennale.
Thanks, Claire. For those of you that haven't been able to see the video, looking inside that plain graveyard, it's incredibly, it's confronting. And I think where you're touching around that whole idea of the plaindemic and people talking about the pandemic being spread by aeroplanes, that this idyllic search of that other place of peace and comfort and a faraway land to relax and holiday, and here it was playing into this graveyard scene that you've got with that footage. I saw it for just a minute or two, and it was like, whoa, I just stopped me dead in my tracks. And, you know, talking about cabin fever and everything to do with transport as opposed to being here and now and grounded, I think that ties in beautifully.
Well, I almost feel like it's been a really important period us to just put everything on hold, to pause, and, you know, to really just appreciate what we have right around us. You know, I think that's been really important, because I think for too long there has been a disconnect between, you know, when you see these beautiful hipsters in their amazing clothing, frolicking in the aeroplane graveyard, taking photos. It's, you know, looking at this whole narcissistic culture and this selfie culture. There is a complete disconnect somehow between, you know, what is happening. So I think it's really important that we've had to go through this.
And I like the fact that there's a grevillea in there. There's such an amazing species, and the more we get to understand our Australian flora and how their symbiotic relationship with all of the insects and the birds, like we have an absolute horticultural paradise, and to see people connecting with that ever closer, that's a joy for me personally. But it's a big shift that Auntie was talking about, that cultural obligation to understand what we live with. You know, we are symbiotically connected to the land. So thank you. And moving along to Nicole, explain. It's lovely to see you. Tell us a little bit about how you approached it.
So the work is currently outside in the courtyard. It's called Gaimea Nungana, which means listening, hearing, thinking. And it's a work that was developed in collaboration with Uncle Harry over here. And we also were very lucky, and Auntie Lynn came and centred the work with her daughter as well. And we also had Jen and Jim also tell some stories, and the gardeners from around here. So it was very much a collaborative work, and a lot of help also that made that work a possibility. But in the beginning, whenever I'm approached to do work, my first point of call is to ask who from that community can I talk to. And Uncle Harry is very active in the community here, and that's who Vandana put me on to. And it basically just came about from conversations with Uncle Harry about what was important to community here. And the things that came from that were the river, the Georges River, and the Gaimea lily. And so we just talked about that, and we talked about the stories and what was meaningful to us as Aboriginal people. You know, we're not from here, but there was a lot of threads, you know, that join us together. And we stood out in the courtyard, and we just stood there and we just sort of went, well, how can we best tell this story, like in this space? Like what would it feel like for people, you know? And so then we sort of came up with the idea of the river flowing down and then having that Gaimea lily in the centre to really centre us in this place and have an understanding of the meaning of this place. And, you know, the more we talked about it, we realised the Gaimea lily is actually what fishing spears are made of, and obviously the river being super important here as well. It's almost like it was like a recipe for how to survive on this country. So, yeah, it was really beautiful to sort of see those things and understand about this place by just talking with people that have connection to this place and living memory of what is important here too. So we wanted to, make visible the longest continuous culture in the world by just placing like an ephemeral but also partially living sculpture into the courtyard. And also I think it's been really beautiful watching it there and like actually, you know, digging, you know, actually the tangibility of it, like when you get out into the garden. I mean, you'd know, Costa, it's like there's nothing like it. I've got a real soft spot for shoveling, so whenever I can, I'm always like in a sandpit. But we had a great time, you know, connecting like by doing, I think is really super important. And to have, you know, traditional owners of this place to help us centre the work was just, it was magic. It was just magic. So, and then the few weeks now watching it as it sort of goes through its life cycle, we came out here for the opening and there was like a spider web in between some of the flowers and then bees, and one of the ladies, Jen, that helped build it, she was there till the very end, she went out to look if she could see any bees, and there was actually a little bee trapped in one of the blossoms. And she could see it like buzzing it, and then she popped it open and it flew back out. I was just like, isn't that magic? Like this connection that we can create with nature and have that, you know, deep conversation about what it means, you know, to not just be this sort of human-centric kind of thing where nature, the earth, the plants, the animals, everything has a purpose and, you know, and a real value.
The Gaimea lily, it's such a symbolic, it's iconic in the landscape, and when you see it throw its flower head up, it's something that we relate to. I know I relate to it in the bush at this time of the year, and walking into the foyer and into the courtyard and seeing it sparks a certain feeling.
Yeah, it was really beautiful when we were making it, and I'd turn around and I'd catch the elders like in between Gaimea lilies, and I'm just like, oh wow, isn't that like just beautiful, you know? And just to have them at that eye level perspective as well, like so it's like a forest of Gaimea lilies. Like a lot of the time I see them on the highway really, and I'm flying past and I would love to be able to get up close to them because they're textures and things that you can see when you do spend time with them is a whole nother dimension, you know?
Well, thanks, Nicole. Moving along now, Leah, tell us how you interpreted the theme.
Sure. I think it was perhaps less about interpreting the theme and more about bringing a young voice in. So I work a lot with young people, and I'm always really motivated and empowered by the conversations that I have with those young people. And I mentioned earlier in one of our artist talks, but for me the work is very much rooted in the process, the conversation, and like Nicole said, the sort of learning through doing. This is the first time that I've actually shown the outcome of that process, because that really is just sort of, for me, not the most important thing. But again, I think through the act of exhibiting the work and inviting further conversations, that's sort of just another new dimension. But I think, I guess that the title of the work is quite important. It's Youth for Care Party. And so I responded quite strongly to the term climate emergency in the call out, because I felt that from a space of kind of emergency and crisis, it can be quite debilitating, that you don't necessarily feel like you have a voice, that you can make positive change. And so when speaking with these young people, The idea of care was something that we spoke about quite a lot, but also the idea of the party. So initially, pre-COVID, this work was, I guess, dreamed or imagined to be something that could be, collaborative, participatory, and invite that audience in to sort of build and grow on those narratives. And that sort of party celebration element was quite important. Also as a reaction to the idea that protest and public demonstration is a somewhat negative thing to be engaging in. I think it's really important. But yeah, I mean, it was really beautiful for me, just facilitating those experiences. Sorry, I should have said I collaborated with Biennale Girls High School, and they were amazing, and their art teacher was phenomenal, and without her, the project would not have been able to, have been so successful. But what was really beautiful was that as they developed their confidence and the relationship between us developed, they started to sort of touch on ideas that were not these, buzzwords that we hear in the media, which are obviously very important, but, we're talking about coal and, climate change, but they started talking about animal rights and veganism and mindfulness, and that, for me, was probably the richest takeaway because it made me feel as though they felt safe enough to start talking from a more personal perspective and to feel confident to sort of share that with the world, which was, really lovely.
Seeing your exhibition in the what's like a glass window display at the front of the Arts Centre, it really catches people's attention, and seeing all the words written by the children and their thoughts and their expression, I've got to go back and have a close look at it because I really want to see and read and feel what they're sharing. But it came through immediately just by standing in front of the window and peering into the shop front of all those thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, Jason and I were also talking earlier, it's quite an interesting space for the work to live because, in some ways, obviously you see a protest sign and you imagine that there are people, like those people are kind of absent from it. So it's almost as if that party has been and gone and you're an onlooker. But yeah, I mean, I guess something that I found quite interesting was that, just talking about these ideas of care and how we can further extend this idea of, caring for our audience too. How can we empower them? How can we motivate them rather than sort of taking on these words like don't or do this or, how can we invite people to want to make positive changes and positive choices? But hopefully it resonates, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we'll explore that a little more once we open it up. But thank you. And Jason, your work is a provocation. Tell us a little bit about it and how you've bracketed its intent and its action.
Yeah, sure. So my mural is one of 3 murals on the back wall. So the 3 artists involved, it was a collaborative work, falls under the spectrum of collaboration. So Madison Gibbs, who joins us today at the back. Hi, Maddie.
Hey, Madison.
And Joan Ross, who was our token white person, so we thought we'd keep affirmative action there. And I'll say that because she's not here. So the works act as individual artworks, however, they're talking about the same thread. So Joan's work is mostly known for the intersections of colonisation. So she's not talking for Aboriginal people. It's about the consequences of colonisation. And Madison's work talks about. Sorry, I hope you don't mind me talking for your work, but Madison's work is Banksia. And for those who don't know, Bankstown was named after Sir Joseph Bankstown. So there's threads between Maddie's and Joan's works about placemaking, about dominant Western colonial academy, it's about, Madison's work's about reclamation. So her as an Aboriginal woman is kind of reclaiming that process. Like, why do we need Sir Joseph Banks to draw our plants? Our plants have names. Maddie, remind me of the Darug name. So our plants have names. We don't, you know. So that act is a reclamation. It's like, no, you know, we don't sort of need your help, thanks. So there's threads there. My work kind of specifically speaks about the symbiotic relationship between the invading colony and Aboriginal people, and the impact that that's had on our landscapes. And I say landscapes broadly: social, historically, politically, financially, all of those things. So that was really my sort of nucleus, really. I'm like, what's the symbiotic relationship? Divide and conquer. And then I started looking a little bit more macro, so how organisms were used for biological warfare in order to attempt to wipe out a species. So, you know, I take that biological warfare as which was used in the frontier wars. So it wasn't, a lot of Aboriginal people didn't die out from a common cold. It was biological warfare from tuberculosis, smallpox. It was tried and tested in Africa, India, in many colonised places. So I was looking at that biological relationship and, you know, the histories that are often told from a colonial point of view, but often the oldest living culture in the world seems to be negated somehow, and much more.
Thank you. For those of you watching, the three-piece artwork is actually on the back wall of the entire art centre. So when you stand back and look at it, you can follow this narrative across the back of the wall, and there is a big Bankstown, and then you see the. I hope I pronounced this correctly.
Yeah. So those who haven't seen it, it starts with my work, which is like a sort of pre-contact. Well, actually, it is contact. So it shows the spread of this symbiotic relationship. And then Joan Ross is kind of like a, you know, consequences of, and then it's sort of nicely finished off with Maddie's work, which is like, you know, a reclamation of sorts. So there's sort of three parts, yeah.
Thank you, Jason. Now, over on the screen over there, but he's with us here in spirit and digitally. Bruce, welcome. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to see your face and be able to connect for this event. You've heard an outline of some of the pieces. They're provoking thoughts. They're creating discomfort. They're looking at symbiosis in particular ways. You are constantly engaged in building these relationships, this symbiotic relationship between your culture, your history, and where we stand today. How do you use your language, use words to build this symbiosis between the two worlds that you inhabit?
Well, in Aboriginal culture, you can't separate the spirit from the practical world. To do so is dangerous, and I think what has happened in modern life, we've separated ourselves so much from the world that we're either uncaring of the damage we do, or unaware, and either is as bad as the other. So in Aboriginal life, we're always referring back to the natural world. We're also referring back to the law of protection for the world. So it's really encouraging to listen to those young people who are talking about caring, and explaining the world. Because in the last 700 or 800 years, the world has not been led by politicians. Politicians are there to get elected and to implement policy. But this is not to denigrate politicians in any way, although there are some around the world that lend themselves to denigration. But our society has set us up politically with administrators, not thinkers, not idealists, not philosophers. And the thing that most makes me admire my culture is the fact that the old people had this overarching philosophical uh, understanding of how the world worked, but also how humans might work best in that world and how we might look after the world. Because everything we do in Aboriginal life is about protection. In Yuan culture, we always begin and end our conversation with the words "through the mother," and that's reminding us all the time of where we come from and where we're going to. We come from the mother, our physical mother, and we return to Mother Earth. This is just we're just temporary citizens. Whereas in the modern world, often we think we're the God, you know. The soil of Australia, for instance, isn't doing what we want it to do, so we'll change it. We'll improve it. And, you know, the improvement has been so great that most of it is now in New Zealand. Last Christmas, because of the ploughing done for the cotton crops, in that very, very dry season with very light Australian soils and then strong western winds, a lot of our soil ended up in the Pacific Ocean, the Tasman's Strait and New Zealand. Any reasonable farmer would think that was sacred. And this is why you cannot separate the spirit from the practice of farming. You know, I know people will think that's a bit poor, but we really have to be in love with our earth if we are to protect it. And the old people knew that, and they knew that we had to understand that the earth owed us nothing. We owed the earth everything. In modern Western societies, we seem to believe that the earth owes us a living. She owes us nothing, but she's all we've got, and we have to really look after her as much as we can. So on the farm down on the Wallagra, where we've been growing the old Aboriginal foods as an act of environmental protection as much as cultural resistance, we're growing perennial plants. Almost all the plants Aboriginal people used were perennial. That is, you didn't plough the land for them. And even when you were cultivating the land, which a lot of Aboriginal people did, you lifted, for instance, the tuber, and when you had taken your share of those tubers, you pressed the rest of them back down in the ground. This is enormous caring for the earth. It sequesters carbon, but it also, because those plants are perennial and their root systems are massive compared to, say, wheat or cotton that have minuscule root systems, these plants were reaching moisture way down into the soil. They were reaching nutrients that other plants couldn't reach and bringing them to the surface and absorbing salts. It's total land care, and this is something that we hope that Australians will learn in order to protect their country. These are ideas that aren't going to come from politicians. They have to come from people who believe that we owe the earth everything, not the other way around. So the Aboriginal voice is really important for answering a lot of the environmental difficulties we're going through, because Aboriginal people also believe the river is something that has water in it. And at the moment, we think that we can take out 100% of all water in the Murray-Darling Basin and still expect the fish to live. Not going to happen. So all of these things are embedded in Aboriginal law. It doesn't mean that Aboriginal people are better than non-Aboriginal people, but it means we were very well governed over a very long period of time. And those rules are still relevant to today's world. So I'm really heartened to hear young people talk about the environment in this way, and really encouraged by the fact that Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal artists are working together, because the two facts of Australian history we can't get away from are that Aboriginal people are not going to leave the land, neither are non-Aboriginal people. So whatever we make of this country requires us all to work together. Thanks, Costa.
Thanks, Bruce. The point you're touching there, that privilege and right versus obligation and duty, and that's really the crux of it. And you talked about being in love. Like, when someone says, I love nature, they're marginalised in our current view, because it's like you're generally some environmentalist, you're some greenie, you're a hippie, eco, North Coast living commune worship. There's this language that, as you said, Bruce, needs to change. And the artworks that you're all presenting are confronting that language. But I'll ask you, I'm happy to start if anyone wants to kick it off, but I'll pick someone if I need to. So there's no escape. But how are you using language to create that love that Bruce is talking about, if we're to create new narrative around the Anthropocene and moving forward, if we're going to change the paradigm? In what ways are you using language to get these messages across? And that, I mean language as in terms of graphic language, words, the lot. What way are you using your language? Alison, you're right there.
I'm lucky to work with a sound artist, and he's been fantastically good at working with a broad range of voices in this community, and even during these COVID times, using Zoom to do it and enjoying the kind of fractured results that you sometimes get with Zoom. He's played with that. But one of the most wonderful things, I think, is we asked Matthew Doyle, who's a Darug-speaking Sydney Aboriginal man, to name some of the plant species that we found out about from the Bankstown, Canterbury Bankstown own websites. They had lists of threatened and endangered species of plants. So we've got voices from the local community naming them, the World Music Choir, naming them in English, and Latin names are there too. And Matthew's speaking the names in Darug.
Bangali. Baringora.
So that was this lovely journey to find those words, because we're losing languages and words and cultures as fast as we're losing ecosystems and habitats. You know, they are in a symbiotic relation. So that's one of the ways in which we use literal words and language. But I also think that the language that I'm working with sculpturally, I think I like it to have a kind of almost like a Grimm's fairy story kind of feel to it, because those stories are old European stories of that deep connectedness to country that cultures had and lost. So there's the sense that there was the woods, and it wasn't just an endangered place, it was a place of magic and potential and fearfulness as well. So those are some of the ways in which we're using language.
I mean, Claire, who's telling the stories today? And how are you changing that narrative?
I don't think that our work changes the narrative. I think our work really reflects and highlights where we're at. And in doing that, I hope that, it might question our actions. So rather than offering solutions, it's more about I guess, as an artist, it's very difficult to try to portray this in words, in this language, verbally. So to, do this through the medium of sculpture or video, it's something that, it's a very long process. There's so many parts to it, really. I mean, there's a soundtrack, for instance, with The Pilgrims that is very torpid. It has a certain spatial quality to it, and I think, that offers reflection for an audience. Yeah.
Leah, you tapped in to the children. How did you build that communication, and how did they bring it out?
Yeah, I mean, what you were saying earlier, I think for me, my art making and my artistic process is a way of having difficult conversations with people. So I think if we can't, have conflict when discussing ideas in an art space, then I don't really know where we can have them. And I think that the way towards positive change is talking to people who have different worldviews. So that I think that's one of the biggest problems that we face at the moment, that experiences are so isolated and we're not really coming together and just listening. And so, something that was quite interesting that I found when working with these young people was that, well, I should also preface it by saying initially it was we were going to do these workshops at the Art Centre, and then the rules of COVID changed, and then it was going to be me going in school, and then the Department of Education changed those rules. So we never actually met. It was then entirely virtual, a virtual workshop, and these workshops were 6 or 7 hours at a time. But what I noticed was that when we spoke about care, compassion, and empathy for ourselves and our families, we knew that feeling very well, very instinctually, but when we tried to extend it to conversations around the environment, it automatically became accusatory. And so being able to make, and to not, again, for me as the person facilitating it, to allow the process to go in whatever direction it is going, but then also recognizing that moment to then draw it back to those ideas that you are trying to cultivate and generate and share together. And so we did that through various forms of language, through word, through song, through signs and symbols. What else? We used as many different methods as we could, and then we had something solid to return back to, and to kind of be okay, well, how can we shift this? How can we change the tone? Yeah.
You were communicating, Nicole, with across lots of layers in terms of elders and community. How did you walk that divide, and how did you use language to cut through?
I think it's through conversations. Uncle Harry and I had many conversations, a lot about the interconnectedness of everything. So talking about the plants, the animals, the places that have so much meaning, but also the layers that have now been in this place as well. This used to be the Bankstown baths, so we had Jim come in and talk about a new layer that was sort of on top of that as well. But, I guess one of the most beautiful things that we spoke about was really the horizontal hierarchy, of Aboriginal culture. All of these things, the plants, the animals, the birds, even the more newer histories, everything has a place in the story, and everything as important as each other. I think, like Bruce was saying, we really have taken, humans out of nature, whereas we need to understand we are part of nature. And that was kind of one of the reoccurring themes, I think, that we kept coming sort of back to. So, and then the work is named in First Nations language, so both mine and the language from here as well. So it and it sort of, it combines those two things together. So it's sort of like talking about this coming together, I guess, of Aboriginal cultures from all around Australia. In today's time, we live in all different places, and so that sort of language and hearing the language of a place on that country, I think, is so important, because those sounds have been heard since the beginning of time to this place. Those vibrations, of echoing across this place for so long. So I think when I think about language, I think about a lot about the First Nations languages and how important it is that we spend a lot of time preserving as much of those as we can and learning how to speak them as well. So all of my works now, I try to embed First Nations language in there, and sometimes it can be hard to pronounce, but I like to put it out there, because I think once you start to understand the different rolling of the tongue and the different inflections, you can actually start to read and understand and get a grasp of the culture of that place a bit better too. When you have those vibrations within your body.
Yeah, they're vibrations that the land hasn't heard for a long time. And each time it goes out there, it's heard again, and it echoes.
Yeah, and I think the land hears that.
Jason?
Yeah, I think as artists, we have responsibilities to try and improve society if it's not up to our standards or scratch. I agree, we reflect. I think we hold up a mirror to society. I think we tend to, we have our own lens, but generally it's holding up a mirror. And often what's reflected back is not great. And so I guess that's up to us as individuals to be accountable for that and how we can push on. But I think it's important to understand that as artists, our reach is limited. We partner with organisations like Bankstown Art Centre. This is being archived digitally so that hopefully that can get disseminated through geographical challenges and archive forever, built upon. I think that's a really good change. I think that's a good way to affect change. I personally don't like the work I make. I don't really want to talk about social trauma, particularly both sides, both sides. But also you can't let injustice just exist. I think it's less about us being artists and just about us being people and saying, hey, we're living in a world where we can't feed ourselves. We're living in a world that we can't drink our water. We're draining artesian baths that take millions of years and we don't know how much is tapped yet. Our homes are inadequate. We have the best resources here, rain and sun, and yet it's not mandatory for every house to have solar panels, water tanks, it's basics, we have hundreds of thousands of years of acquired knowledge. We know a thing or two about survival, and yet we're tokenistically asked, but really the solutions that we present, it doesn't suit the government's agenda, largely, not since 1770. So, we're also the only species that kill each other, not for survival. If we look at the world as in grains of sand, let's say Aboriginal people, 1 grain of sand on a beach. Let's take another grain of sand for the modern history, say, since Industrial Revolution, say. Now, the statistics of humans destroying this planet at this exponential rate, it's not sustainable. So, where do we go from there? I know, you brought me to the party, right? But, we've got to ask these questions. We cannot feed ourselves. We cannot grow our own food at the moment. and it's exponential. So, you know, there's so much opportunity for change, but how do we get to the puppet masters? You know, that's the quest. All the people want it, but how do you reach the puppet masters? I guess that's the quest, and whatever the solution is, but until then, we have to act as individuals. We can do simple things like recycling or grow our own food, or like we can do things. It's not all doom and gloom, but something radical has to change. We've given an opportunity in COVID to shake up the world, and personally, I don't think it's been shaken up enough. I think that we're slowly being corralled back into the sheep being funneled into the little funnel thing, you know, but we really need to take this. As artists, we put pressure, you know, we force a discussion, we force change, because it's not being actioned fast enough. So I guess that's part of our role.
And over your shoulder there, Bruce, as an author, as an artist, you've not been one to step back from that mirror that Jason said. You know, you have been incredibly front foot about putting that mirror forward and saying this is the reality of a history that I'm sharing and talking about, and that I've garnered from factual records. You put yourself out there. You, as anyone here knows, that has its consequences, and it's been a difficult. I don't know whether it'd be 12 months or however long it's been, but you know, you were open to a lot of impact as a result of your art. How do you maintain and stand in the face of that reflection that Jason spoke about, and the reverberation and impact on yourself to move forward and keep telling the story?
Family and country, they're the things that have kept me going, and the law. We often say, on you and country, the law will have its way. So despite all the distractions, and those who would like the law to have been abolished, along with the entire population of Aboriginal people, the law will have its way. And the law is a philosophical statement. It's a spiritual statement. And this is what guides and carries me, and the love of my family and my love for them. When things are difficult, I always turn back to country, and I'm restored by it. Not just the pretty things, but the gutsy things that country is capable of doing. And it has always sustained me. You know, as artists, you're always going to come under fire. I think about the whales coming up and down the coast at the moment, you know, and so many people have the privilege to go and watch and see whales out at sea. And yet the very fact we have whales now is probably a result of all those long-haired hippies in Greenpeace boats who defied all the world's governments, to try to ban whaling. Their activism is the reason why we have whales today. We were on the brink of losing all humpbacks, all southern right whales, and these are the creatures now that we can see readily along the coast. And millionaires with their $1 million boats are now making millions of dollars out of what the hippies did. So we have to stop this right-wing, left-wing, you know, green washing, whitewashing talk. We've got to act as a population of people working together. Stop deriding the Greens. Stop deriding, you know, capitalists. Let's work together, because, you know, the old Greenies in their whale protests, it provided a boom for the world and for capitalism at the same time. So those old labels should die. It should be just people, you know, people coming up with good ideas, good respectful ideas, not to line their own pockets, but for the good of the world, through the mother.
Leah, you were working with the children, and as Bruce just said then, people did something. People stood up and confronted. I've been working with children, the Tasmanian Youth Climate Leaders, and doing that for 2 years. And when I go to those conferences, that they've been online this year, that the ideas and the knowledge and the understanding, it doesn't amaze me, it just it enthuses and fills me with hope. What have you seen? What are the positives that you saw coming out in the children looking forward with their visions for change?
There's also parts of the workshop that I facilitated, which is not visible in those windows. But I think one of the most interesting conversations that I was able to, sort of sit back and watch was when we were talking about voting, because I realised I introduced that as a concept because, I remember being a young person at school and absolutely knowing nothing about what it meant to vote when I was 18 and finally allowed. But seeing them self-organise and seeing them sort of listen and respect each other in that space when they were sharing ideas, and again, not necessarily agreeing with each other, but able to sit alongside each other and listen and have a healthy debate and conversation was probably what inspired and impressed me the most. I think, many of us could really learn something from that. But then I should also preface that by saying that I only spent, 3 or 4 weeks with these students where I have seen really significant, change and sort of leaders is working with the youth committee at the MCA, which is similar. A lot of those students are also involved in leading the youth climate strikes and panel discussions for young people, connecting. And I think what they're also doing too is ensuring that there is like a local constituent or a local conversation, but then they're also connecting nationally and internationally. So being aware of what needs to be done, in their immediate worlds and in the space in which they locate themselves, but also, connecting with their peers abroad and trying to facilitate, wider knowledge, wider change. Yeah.
Did they feel like there is potential to change the checkmate of politics at the moment, the way people feel and how their voice can or can't matter? How did they see it?
I mean, I think these young people that I worked with were quite empowered by the fact that they felt like they had a voice, that they felt like people were listening to them. And so I don't necessarily know whether they had strong opinions on sort of, shaking up the current political structure, but I do feel as though they felt confident that with the current sort of shift, I think it is quite impressive how politically aware younger people are becoming. And I think it's essential and necessary, but I certainly didn't know as much about the world as they do at that age, and so I can only hope that is, a positive shift. But I definitely believe that they felt as though that younger people were far more aware, far more connected to politics and to ideas around climate change and the environment, and that there was some buzz which was taking shape, which can hopefully only, further increase and develop.
Everyone's talking about care, from Auntie at the beginning to Bruce, to each and every one of you. You've been talking about care. Care in not just how you presented your work, but care in terms of country and future and connection. How do we take your messages of care to the next level? Because that to me is a theme that I'm hearing throughout every part of this. Alison, how do you...
Well, one of the things that Boyd and I have been doing for many years now is that we do a carbon audit of all of our projects, So we factor in how much fuel we've used transporting things to the gallery, or any travel that's involved. We even look at the energy that the lights in the gallery are using, our materials, the embodied energy in our materials, whether it's found or recycled or not. And then we do an offset. And the last two projects we've chosen, we always choose something that's apt for our particular project. It might be to do with diet and food and agriculture, for instance. But the last two projects we've chosen to support for our offset the Youth Strike for Climate, because that's really, what's got to happen next is that, we've just got to really support the young people who are just getting really active, and that's one good way to do it. And I think all artists should be doing a carbon audit on their projects.
I think more than artists, I think this should actually come into absolutely every, just everywhere. I think
agree.
We really need to think about, every single thing that we purchase at the supermarket. And, even when Aldi started putting their carbon information on some of their packaging, I think that is really, encouraging. And I think we need to start thinking about, locally and globally. We're all very connected. But yeah, I think there needs to be systemic change. Like, this capitalist world that we live in is unfortunately not listening to the facts. And, there's so much science out there that, tells us that we're heading in a very kind of catastrophic direction, yet the recovery we're about to take, whether it's a gas-led recovery, is for me infuriating. And we need a revolution. I mean, I feel like I care so much. Like for decades, I've been doing my little DIY bit to make sure I'm harnessing my electricity from the sun. But I think we live in a country of so much wind, so much sunshine. Yet we are behind a lot of European nations when it comes to solar energy. And I think about this care that is coming from the younger people going to these climate strikes. We have to be there to support that, and we are part of this. I guess this generation of absolute destruction, and I think. Yeah, I wish I had the answer to figure out how we can translate the care into changing things.
I guess everyone's talking about caring for country in some ways, and I guess if some of the things we've been talking about today are First Nations practices, and if we did go and take a leaf out of some of those of the books that of Aboriginal practices, then we would have a much more sustainable way of being and living on our planet. So if we all took some time out to understand the place and the space and the practices that have been lived and breathed on that country since the beginning of time, and then didn't stand for anything that was below that. We didn't stand for the mining, we didn't stand for the gas being taken, we didn't stand for that. If we all stood up for what this country deserves, then we'd all have all of those things that we all desire.
Yeah, I mean, we all care for the country, but we have this saying culturally where it's like, don't tell us you're sorry, but perform sorry, and I think that really speaks to it. I think humans care about, it's safely to assume that we care about oxygen, the only thing helping us live. We care about clean water. But I sort of lean more towards Claire, and what most Aboriginal people know is about the systemic factors that don't allow good things to happen, There are lots of people in our government and you know, people in this room that want to make real change. It just takes you to the next level, and that systemic oppression just goes to the next level, until it's quashed, seemingly. So again, I don't know what the answers are either. We just do our best as individuals, I guess, but to take stock in the oldest cultures in the world, worldwide, you know, Australia has a unique opportunity. The fire devastation is devastating every year since 1770, largely. And yet we have, you know, Aboriginal people that know the country, know the history, know how to do sustainable, you know, fire stick farming, you know, to teach government agencies to manage solar power farms out in the desert where no white fella would ever want to live, you know, and you know, all the answers are there. They're just not being actioned by the powers that be, and I think the people all want it, but it's the, you know, Western dominant capitalist systems, arguably developed, say, Roman Empire, and rolled out ever since. Yeah.
Bruce, how do you see the care narrative translating, and how are you moving forward to get that message across?
Being careful for the sake of the earth makes good economic sense. You know, destroying all our assets, that is the world, its water and its soil, doesn't make very good economic sense. So we have to convince our government that if they wanted to be successful, if businesses wanted to continue to thrive, then we'd all have to become conservatives. You know, we need to steal back the word conservative so that every decision we do is conservative of the earth. And I think it makes economic sense. And I think there are a lot of people in business who know that. And that is why most world businesses have turned away from coal, because they know that there's no future for it. All there is a very bad future. And most common sense people, and many of them are in business, are turning their backs on coal as an investment. It's only our government that seems still enthralled by for whatever reason. But that's where artists, young people, people with a worldview of how the economy works, have to stand up and say, well, listen, you know, your scheme might make economic sense in your mind, but it doesn't make economic sense in our mind. We are business people too. We are citizens of the earth, and we're going to resist you. Instead of being just submissive to these notions of, you know, capital is good, you know, the world runs on demand and supply instead of running on what Mother Earth can provide. These principles need to be embedded in our schools. They're not communist principles. They're not radical principles. They're utterly conservative principles. Until we start looking at the world in a very conservative way, then we'll be run by radicals.
Bruce, you will appreciate this. One of the best things that I heard on a live broadcast that I did through my friend John over in Perth, he said, we can talk, and for a long time reconciliation has been a word. And he said to me, and I'll never forget this, and it was only about 2 months ago, and I've shared it, I've amplified it. He said, what we need is not reconciliation, we need reconciliation, because it's the actions that we take, and the actions of these artists in naming the Banksia in its proper language, to start to talk language, to action things. I mean, even with our show on the ABC, we now put the suburb and the country name, and that puts it out there and someone sees it. But what could that do on a bigger scale? And make other shows to do that, so that the language starts to echo further and further up the valley and over the ridge and down the other side. And all of your work, I want to thank our artists, those here today, but also to our artists that can't be here. So could you please put your hands together for all our artists? Alison, Claire, Nicole, who's here with the little one, Leah, Jason, thank you. And joining us from the comfort of his lounge and sharing his insights. Bruce, it was wonderful to have you here with us. Thank you very much for being a part of the first Biennale here at the Bankstown Arts Centre.